We don't have a lot of time. I know we've sidestepped the plumbing today, but we're going to talk about how AI is completely transforming marketing. So I'm actually going to give you a framework that's probably not traditional, it's probably not something you've heard before, and how that framework can be applied to solve not just problems in marketing, but to any industry. We'll also, if we've got time, talk about the impact that these technologies are going to have on society, on humanity as well. So I've been involved in AI for about 25 years, my undergraduate, PhD, postdoctoral in AI. I started a company about 17 years ago that's been building AI solutions for some of the biggest companies in the world. I sold that to WPP, despite knowing nothing about marketing, and I still like to claim I know nothing about marketing because it allows me to ask stupid questions, where I'm now the Chief AI Officer and also run WPP's DeepMind, which is my original company, SATALIA. So that's me, it's boring. Let's talk about AI. I guess, every time there's a new technology, we get very excited, and we try to apply that new technology to solving typically the wrong problems. 10 years ago, people were building data lakes. They were putting Tableau or some sort of analytics layer on top and hoping that by extracting insights from data and giving those insights to human beings, that it will lead to better decisions. If I'm honest with you, giving human beings better insights doesn't lead to better decisions. Companies don't have insight problems, they have decision problems. And decision making is a completely different field in computer science. If you're old enough, it used to be called operations research. It's discrete mathematics. It's not generative AI. It's not machine learning. And it turns out that human beings are pretty bad at making decisions. We'll talk about this later on. But if you've ever read the book by Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow, or Daniel Ariely, who talks about predictably rational, you'll realize there are some things that humans are good at and some things we're not good at. And it's really important we identify the things that we use AI for and the things that we don't. So anyway, if I build a system that I give data to and it makes a decision, and tomorrow I give it the same data, it makes the same decision, what I have is automation. And automation is amazing because we can get computers to do things better than human beings. But does anybody know the definition of stupidity? What's the definition of stupidity? It's doing the same thing over again and expect a different answer. I would argue, controversially, that by definition, automation is stupid. It's not AI. I know that everybody that currently touches these words calls themselves an AI company. It's fine. We get more clients. We get more funding. There are unfortunately many definitions of AI. The most popular definition, I think, is the weakest definition, which is getting computers to do things that humans can do. Over the past 3 years, we've managed to get machines to correspond in natural language, to recognize objects and images, and when we get machines to behave like humans, because humans are the most intelligent thing we know in the universe, we assume that that's intelligence. Now, if you read these books, you'll realize that humans are not that intelligent. That's a different conversation. But if I built a robot that operated like a mouse or a dolphin, that would be the most intelligent thing that we've ever seen. So benchmarking machines against humans, again, is a very silly thing to do. Using human beings as the pinnacle of intelligence is not sensible. There's a very nice, elegant definition of intelligence from the 80s, which is this. It's goal-directed adaptive behavior. It's building systems that make decisions, learn about whether those decisions are good or bad, adapt themselves so next time you make better decisions. And if I'm being totally honest with ourselves, most of the systems that we see in production don't adapt themselves. Most of the systems, if I held to this definition, I would argue are not AI. Now, that's a bit controversial, and it's not very helpful. And the point is really that if looking at AI through definitions, looking at AI through technology is not a very helpful thing to do. So I'm going to give you a different framework, a different way of thinking about AI, and I'm going to try to bring it to life with respect to marketing. So before I do a little bit of a history lesson, so this is AI in the 60s and 70s. This is Socrates. Socrates is famous for inspiring the Socratic method. If I say to you that Socrates is a man and all men are mortal, I can infer that Socrates is mortal. I can create new knowledge. And AI in the 60s and 70s was writing down lots of things that we know about the world and then trying to infer new knowledge. And it didn't really work. It didn't really scale. This is now having a renaissance. We call this agentic computing. We'll talk about this later. But anyway, in the 80s and 90s, a new type of AI came along that's modeled how our brains work. This is the brain of a bumblebee. My PhD 20 years ago was trying to model the brain of a bumblebee in a machine. Bumblebees have 1 million brain cells. Their brains can fit on the end of a needle. Bumblebees do amazing things. They talk to each other. They navigate 3D worlds. They solve problems. They don't handle Windows very well, but ultimately, they're very smart creatures. And the question was, can you model 1 million brain cells in a machine? 20 years ago, we couldn't, but we can now model billions of brain cells, and we call these large language models. Now, I would argue that large language models are really good at knowing things about the world. They're really good at telling you what they know about the world through imagery, through text. They are not good at making predictions. They are not good at making complex decisions. This is not a panacea that solves all problems across your organization. Okay, it's really important that you choose the right algorithms. And actually, even as these large language models get smarter, I would argue that 5-6 years ago, they operated a bit like toddlers. They just produced gibberish. In 2022, ChatGPT was launched, and I would argue, as I mentioned earlier, this operates like an intoxicated graduate. Almost half of what ChatGPT came out with was wrong. It was made up. And as these machines get smarter, so now we're starting to see master's level machines that can do rudimentary reasoning. Soon we'll have a PhD level where you can give it a complex task. It will break that task down and solve the problem. Eventually we'll have AIs creating science, doing science, creating new knowledge. And eventually we'll have a professor that's going out there identifying questions that we haven't identified and then trying to solve them. So by the end of this decade, we're most likely to have a professor in our pocket. Now, how quickly these technologies enter our organizations is up to us. But as I mentioned earlier, even professors can't solve a media plan. I'm going to talk about this later on. It's really important that even as these technologies progress, they're not necessarily the right technologies to solve the problems in your business. So I look at AI not through definitions or through technologies. I look at it through applications. I believe there are 6 types of problem that exist in any industry that can be mapped to one of these applications. So I'll say this again. All of the frictions that you experience in your organization can be mapped to one of these applications. Okay, the first one actually is task automation. The fact is, using very simple algorithms, if-then-else statements, macros, robotic process automation, using very simple algorithms can drive a huge amount of value. You don't need to gravitate to new shiny technologies like machine learning and generative AI. The second application is content generation. Now, because of large language models, you all have the ability to create any generic content, imagery, text, soon video, soon sound. The battleground for organizations, particularly in our industry, is not creating generic content. The battleground is creating brand-specific, production-grade, differentiated content. That is very hard. That last mile is extremely hard. I want to geek out a second. In WPP, we build what we call brand brains. A brand brain is tasked with producing brand-specific production-grade content. There are 4 ways of making a brain smart. Okay, the first way of making a brain smart is by asking it better questions. So we can all learn to prompt and ask better questions in seconds. It doesn't take much energy, but you're not going to create a prompt accurate enough to create a perfect ad. It will get you to about 50% good. The second way of making a brain smart is by giving that brain like your brand guidelines, your imagery, your tone of voice, and then you ask it some questions and it looks at your materials and it answers them. And that will get you to about 70% good. It's called ragging. Most of the startups, most of the technologies out there are using that approach, and it takes minutes to build. The third way of making a brain smart is turning that intoxicated graduate into an expert. Now, we know how long it takes human beings to become experts. It takes years of training, blood, sweat, tears, trial and error. In the AI world, it currently takes months to tune these technologies. And there are only a handful of models out there that you actually can tune and train to become experts. You can't do it with all of them. When we build brand brains into WPP, we actually build a council of experts, an expert at your tone of voice, your values, your written copy, your imagery. Just like in the real world, you get different experts all collaborating and communicating to get to about now 98% good. So we're almost at the point where we can create brand-specific production-grade ads. The third category is human representation. So I guess what's really exciting about large language models is not their ability to create content. It's actually their ability to recreate how people perceive content. For the first time ever, we can build brains that allow us to recreate how you think and feel about things. In a world where we can create pretty much any content, the challenge is how is that content good? Historically, if I show you content, I'd have to ask you, how did you think and feel about that? But what we can do now is build what we call audience brains that recreate those signals that go in your mind and body to allow us then to create better content, but now also more accurately predict activation. And unlike brand brains, where the differentiator is how you tune and pipeline these complex technologies, the differentiator for audience brains is actually just data. Understanding the data that you need to understand human perception is a differentiator. In the marketing world, historically, we've collected names, addresses, dates of birth, gender, As far as I'm concerned, that's a proxy for how you perceive things. Where you live and how old you are is a proxy. How you perceive an ad depends on whether you've just fallen in love, how much money you have in your account, the weather, the time of the day, how well your soccer team or cricket team played at the weekend. Understanding that data that helps you build representative audiences is a differentiator. The fourth category is what people called AI 3 years ago, before generative AI. It's machine learning, it's data science. You already know my opinion. Giving human beings better insights doesn't lead to better decisions. The power of machine learning is not actually making predictions. The power of machine learning is explaining those predictions. So if I show you an ad with a black cat, I can accurately predict the clicks and the likes and the sales. But what machine learning can do, if you implement it correctly, it can say, Daniel, if you change that from a black cat to a ginger cat, you're going to get more clicks, likes, and sales because that person likes Garfield. Now, it's a terrible example, but the point is that machine learning can surface insights from data in ways that human beings can't, and we can use those insights to actually then make better decisions. That's the power of machine learning. Now that I can create content very quickly, now that I can test content against audiences, now that I can predict activation, my next challenge is how do I then push that content across channels to maximize my return? This is not a generative AI problem, it's not a machine learning problem, it's an optimization problem. And just to give you an idea about how hard optimization is, imagine if I have 5 pieces of content that I need to allocate to 5 channels. Do you know how many possible solutions are there? Do you know? 5 times 4 times 3 times 5 factorial, exclamation mark, we learned in school. So there's 120 possible ways to allocate 5 pieces of content across 5 channels. Let's make the problem more complicated. I've got 15 pieces of content. How many ways can I allocate 15 pieces of content across 15 channels? Don't say 15 factorial. That's cheating. Okay, so over 1 trillion possible solutions. To expect a human to solve this problem, we are wasting our time. One rule to take away today, anything more than 7, don't use a human for. Here are 500 pieces of content to allocate to 500 channels. Can you tell me how many solutions? No, you can't. It's a big number. And just to put this number into context, this is how many atoms there are in the universe. Once you reach about 60 things you have to consider, whether it's 60 people to allocate to 60 pieces of work or 60 pieces of content to allocate to channels, there are more solutions than there are atoms in the universe. If you choose the wrong algorithm, it will solve this problem badly. If you choose the right algorithm, it will differentiate your business. I want to actually just drum this problem home. Slightly different context. Imagine you've got a delivery van, and your delivery van has to deliver packages around these 24 points. Humans are quite good at solving these spatial problems. After a few minutes, we'll draw a nice path around those points. Now, how long will it take a computer to get the shortest path? The one that's going to save the most amount of time, petrol, energy? How long will it take a computer to get the shortest path around those 24 points? Seconds? Somewhere between seconds and 20 billion years. If you put 24 factorial into your calculator, you get this number. This is how many solutions there are around these 24 points. If you had a computer that could check 1 million solutions a second, it would take 20 billion years to go through all of those and say, this one that I looked at 10 billion years ago, this one's the shortest one. If I had another point to the map, it becomes 25 times 20 billion years, 5,000 billion years. If I had another point to the map, it becomes 26 times 5,000 billion years. These are exponential problems. They get ugly very quickly. You have lots of them across your organizations. Most organizations do. They're most likely being solved by human beings very badly or by algorithms badly. The delta here is if you choose the wrong algorithm, it will literally take longer than the age of the universe. If you choose the right algorithm, it will take milliseconds. That's the opportunity cost. Okay, the final one is human augmentation. So a few years ago, to be talking about how we can use exoskeletons and cybernetics to make ourselves faster, better, stronger. One of the things that we're doing, actually, is with our employees, we create a digital twin of that employee. We create a large language model that's trained on their email, their calendar, their communications, their feedback. And we can ask that digital you, if I put you on this project, will you work well? If I put you on this team, will you thrive? Now, that might sound really creepy, but it's being embraced by those employees because they feel like their digital twin represents them better than 5 numbers in a HR database, and it really does. But what's exciting about this is that you're actually all building digital twins of your personal selves. You might have an AI on your phone, maybe Perplexity or Copilot. That is not a Copilot. It's not an assistant. It's a digital you. It's learning off your data, your hopes, your dreams, your desires. At some point, you're going to give it agency. You're going to give it the ability to make decisions for you, purchasing decisions. And what's exciting about this is that us as a marketing community need to not only figure out how do we market to human beings and capture their attention, but we need to now figure out how to market to AIs and get them to capture their attention. Actually, I could share with you some ideas about how we're doing that. So I love these 6 categories because they help you navigate this complex world of AI safety, security, ethics, governance. There's a huge amount of misunderstanding associated with AI. There are really 3 questions you need to ask yourself when implementing AI in production. The first one is the intent appropriate? Is this ethically correct? And I know there's people that have rebranded themselves as AI ethicists. I would argue there's no such thing as AI ethics. The difference between AIs and human beings is that human beings have intent. AIs don't have intent yet, and it's the intent that needs to get scrutinized from an ethics perspective. The second 2 questions are safety questions, which is, are my algorithms explainable? The difference between software and AI is that AIs tend to be opaque in terms of how they make their decisions. We don't really know always how they're making their decisions. If you can make them explainable, then most of these words go away. They become transparent, auditable, responsible. Explainability is your key problem to solve. And finally, you need to ask yourself, this is going to sound strange, not what happens if my AI goes wrong. As engineers, when we build systems, we have to identify failure points and make sure that we mitigate them. But you now need to ask yourself, what happens if my AI goes very right? For the first time ever, these technologies can overachieve their goal. So in our world, in marketing, there's a human bias called homophily, which is that we tend to trust and like people that look and sound like us. Now, if I optimized ads, you end up with a world, potentially, of you selling to you. Now, that might be very good for business, but it might be enforcing biases and bigotry and social bubbles. So you need to think about what are the consequences of our AI overachieving its goal. I think there are 3 things that differentiate an organization in the world of AI. The first one, we've talked about this today already, is data. If you have data that contains insights that are more useful than your competitors, then you have an advantage. Data makes AI smart. Okay? The second is talent. Now, I know that most people have rebranded themselves as AI experts over the past 3 years, but the fact is, if you want to build differentiated AI solutions, you need differentiated AI talent. People have been doing this for 10, 15, 20 years. Don't kid yourself that you're going to be able to beat your competitors if you're not using differentiated AI talent. And finally, it's leadership. And I don't just mean talk. I think everybody's a leader. Leadership isn't a title given to you, it's earned. It's if you understand the transformational power of these technologies, if you can make sure that you're placing the right bets to make sure that these technologies are having the most amount of value, then you have an advantage. If your leadership are not savvy, they don't understand these things, you'll place the wrong bets and cause lots of misinvestment. I think there are a few things that are going to emerge over the coming years. So I think we're using AI to solve problems across our supply chain. There's a concept called agents that are appearing, essentially digital employees that are going to be used to augment our work. But those digital agents are going to start to enter the physical world. In the next 5 years, we're going to see robots entering the world. And there's some new emerging technology that is barely on the radar of most organizations called neuromorphics. Now, large language models, as you all know, are massively energy intensive. They require lots of data to learn. They learn very slowly. Your brains operate on the power of a light bulb. You learn incredibly quickly. You only need to see one piece of data for you to know what it is. Neuromorphics are some new emerging technologies that are modeled on how our brains work, and I think that over the coming years, understanding about how human brains work, how AIs work, means we'll have a renaissance in what's called neuromarketing. Neuromarketing is looking inside people's brains to see how they think and feel about things. And I think that's going to be an advantage for organizations if you bring that talent. Okay, so there are 3 types of AI risks. The first one we've talked about is how do we bring these technologies inside our organizations in a safe and responsible way. There are malicious risks. How do we prevent bad actors from creating pathogens and misinformation? But there are also macro risks, big questions that we're facing as a species over the next 5-10 years that I think most people are now thinking about, which is great. So I've captured these risks using a concept called PESTLE. You might have come across this framework before. It's a macro framework. It stands for political, environmental, social, technological, legal, and economic. And you might have all heard the word also singularity. A singularity is a point in time that you can't see beyond. And it was adopted by the AI community to refer to the technological singularity, which is where we build a brain 1,000,000 times smarter than us. I'll come back to that later on. So I think there are 6 singularities. Very quickly, the first one is the political singularity, a post-truth world, a world where people no longer know what is true. And with misinformation bots, deepfakes have challenged our political foundations, and they continue to challenge our political foundations, but they're also now challenging the fabric of our reality. So with a few seconds of your voice, with a few images, I can now clone you, and people are using clones to commit fraud. Mark Reed, the CEO of WPP, was cloned last year. Somebody tried to use his clone to commit fraud. I actually think that our community can solve this problem, so I'm actually very hopeful. The second one is the environmental singularity. Again, we've spoken about this today. As far as I'm concerned, AI is advancing consumption. But consumption typically gives people access to goods and services that enrich their lives. And we know it's putting pressure on our planetary boundaries, but I know that if we apply algorithms, if we apply AI in the right way, we can at least halve the amount of energy that we need to run this planet. And the reason why I know that is because every time I've solved a problem for Tesco or PwC or whatever, we typically reduce the amount of carbon by 25% and unlock more capacity. If you can optimize across your entire organization, you can reduce the amount of carbon even more. We could easily halve the amount of energy and still operate this planet with abundance. The social singularity is not my expertise. It's a point in time where we cure death. There are scientists that believe there are people alive today that don't have to die. AI is advancing medicine. It's able to monitor ourselves, and soon nanobots will be cleaning us out. And a bit like a car, if you stay on top of damage, that car will never, ever break down. In fact, I just signed up to a website recently called tomorrow.bio. For the price of a cappuccino a week, $5 a week, they'll freeze you if you die. So if I died now, they'll come and get me and they'll freeze me. They don't know how to unfreeze me, but the point is that for the price of a commodity, we could all potentially now cheat death. The technological singularity is when we build a brain 1,000,000 times smarter than us. Now, my community felt this wasn't going to happen for another 40 years. We think it might now happen in the next 5, 10 years, and we have no idea if this is going to be the most glorious thing that happens to us or our biggest existential threat. I'm a little bit worried about this, and actually I've just started a company. There's a spin-out of WPP to try to solve machine consciousness. Machine consciousness is going to become a thing over the next several years. Happy to talk about that later on. My advice to people is that when superintelligence comes, look busy, be nice to each other, and hopefully it will bugger off to a different dimension. That's what I hope will happen. Okay, the legal singularity is when surveillance becomes ubiquitous. We're nearly done. So, we're in the business of not only understanding perception, but influencing perception. That's our explicit business. And AI is becoming really good at influencing people. And that's a very powerful position to be in. We need to make sure that we're doing it safely, responsibly. And we also need to make sure we're preventing bad actors from using these technologies to accumulate more wealth and more power. The final singularity is my favorite singularity. This is about AI and jobs. So, for the past 17 years, I've been using AI to free people from mundane, repetitive tasks. Those people have not lost their jobs. They've gone on to do more important, impactful, purposeful things. And I think for the next 5 years, we're going to see a Cambrian explosion of new innovations, new opportunities. Jobs will be displaced and disrupted, but AI is like an energy source that will allow humanity to grow. Beyond 5, 10 years, I don't think anybody knows what they're talking about, okay? And just to give you the two extremes of the argument that we hear in the press, the one extreme of the argument is that when AI can free up whole jobs, it probably will. The pressure to reduce costs, increase profits, means that we'll probably free up whole jobs or stop hiring. If that happens very quickly, we might see mass technological employment, which will lead to social unrest, and our economies not being able to rebalance. And I think we need to lean into that problem and think about mitigating those risks. The other side of the argument is that we should be accelerating as fast as possible towards this singularity. By removing the friction from the creation and dissemination of goods, food, healthcare, energy, transport, education, we can bring the cost of those goods down to essentially zero. So imagine being born into a world where you might not access paid work, but everything you need to survive and thrive as a human being is free, is abundant. Now, people say to me, Daniel, what would I do if I didn't have a job? A job defines who I am as a human being. I know lots of people who don't have jobs. They're not sitting at home bored and depressed. They're usually using their time and their energy to try and contribute to humanity. So I'm going to ask you a question. What would you do if you didn't have to do paid work and everything was free? What would you do? Golf is usually the first answer I get. Indulge in your hobbies, travel, read, spend more time with your friends and family. What else would you do? Teach, exactly. So you keep pushing people to say the same thing, which is, I want to do something that makes the lives of other people better. I think we all have an innate desire to want to make the world a little bit better. Unfortunately, we're all born into economic constraints preventing us from doing that. So I think the promise of AI is freeing people from those constraints. I'm going to close by saying it's not good enough for an organization just to have a strong, profitable business. We've talked about this already. It's really important you have a purpose. If you don't have a purpose, you're definitely not going to attract AI talent, and at some point, you're probably not going to attract customers. I joined WPP because I believe in their purpose. It's to use the power of creativity to make a better future. And I think a better future is a world where people are economically free to use their creativity to make the world better for others. It's not a utopia, it's called a protopia. And I think the promise of AI is to allow us to create this world. So I think on that note, I'm going to stop, and thank you all for listening. Thanks.